Okay, so please welcome Miriam and Jesus. So Miriam and Jesus are going to share with us their experience with lobbying. So thank you for coming. So they're coming all the way from Spain and France to share their experience with us. So Miriam is a head of communication and policy at Energy Cities, and she is a partner from a horizontal project which is called MED Nice in English. And this horizontal project is coordinating the efficient building community, thematic community. And Jesus Freire is Business Development Officer at the European Cyclists Foundation. He is a partner of MED Cycle Tour from the Sustainable Tourism thematic community. So Miriam, could you please briefly introduce yourself and explain us what your daily work consists in?
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm actually rather a northern girl because I'm from Berlin, but I'm really glad to be here in the south with you today. I'm working in France, in Besançon, for Energy Cities, which is a European city network. So it's kind of part of those thematic networks that Andrea was just mentioning. So we are gathering local authorities all over Europe, really from Portugal to Finland and even including Ukraine and Turkey, around energy issues in the urban field. So actually what our cities have in common is that they want to push the energy transition, make their places more livable by reducing the energy consumption. And this can be both in buildings and mobility, being smart cities, but rather in the sense that data would be used for the well-being of citizens or the local stakeholders than just for collecting data for business issues. And so we actually put our cities together to work together to test solutions, which is also being done in the framework of the MED Nice project, which is indeed about energy retrofitting in public buildings. We try to spread all those solutions that we find amongst our member cities throughout Europe so that others can do the same. And then, of course, one very important pillar is the advocacy work that we do, the lobbying work. We have our team in Brussels, so essentially, in total we're a team of 25 people, but we have like 2 to 3 full-time policy officers who are really doing the proper lobbying work. So if you want me to go into detail on what they really specifically do, it's really very much actually one of the major issues is about monitoring what is going on in the EU field and monitoring really energy developments throughout the year, really looking into both formal information sources, which can be like the official communications of the Commission or what the rapporteurs are doing in the Parliament, even social media from the EU institutions, and then rather, let's say, public sources, which would be like media, which are very much specialized in EU policies, like Euractiv or Context in France. I guess Jesus is probably using similar sources. And then I think one key issue is, and I think essentially that makes a lot of our work, is drinking coffee and beer, because we meet a lot rather in an informal setting, and that's really, I think that's key for being a good lobbyist. You have to know who are the right people, who are the influencers. They are not necessarily actually the high-level people, because most of the time, and I think Andrea was kind of mentioning it earlier, the legislative process is very much being done by policy officers and technical people, and it only goes to the high-level people at the very end. So I think it's all about really influencing and getting your message through to those people.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you're right. Actually, tomorrow I think the lobbyists they're going to say the same. That lobbying is very much about having a beer and drinking coffee with the right people. So what about you, Jesus? Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I think.
Because this is
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to be here today. My name is Jesus Freire. I work for the European Cyclists Federation. We are based in Brussels, so I'm one of those 11,000 registered lobbyists. So you see that there is no danger on that. It's still even for me when you say it's not 11, it's 30,000. I say, woo. And I say, well, watch out. You are one, and a lot of people you know are, and we are pretty normal ones, and defending, I believe, which are very good causes, defending the European citizens' interests. So basically, the European Cyclists Federation, we are almost 30 people working in Brussels. We are the umbrella organization for cyclists in Europe, for daily cyclists, people who use the bicycle for go to work, people who use the bicycle, the bike sharing systems, or people who also cycle for cycling tourism purposes. So we represent over 500,000 individual cyclists from 80 cycling organizations of all Europe and beyond. That's from more than 40 different countries, and similar that in the case of your organization, we have a policy team working on follow-up of the different policies that affect the life of the over 65 million daily cyclists that live in the EU, but also all those who use a bicycle time to time, or that they use a bicycle for their cycling holidays along Europe. Regarding what we do, well, our objective is that more people cycle more often, so we do lobby for that. So we intend that all the European policies that affect cycling, from health to urban issues, passenger rights on public transport, tourism, road safety, you cannot imagine if you start to think how many different EU policies affect cycling. We are following up, and we are trying to have an impact, and we are trying to be the voice of cyclists, in Brussels. And we are here in the front of an Interreg project, the MED Cycle Tour, that's connected to one of my main activities within the ECF. I work specifically on Eurovelo. If I could show you a map, it's basically the European cycle route network. So saying that we have a European highway network, there is a existing European long distance cycle route network, 15 long distance cycle routes, more than 70,000 kilometers of high quality cycle routes. And one of them, the Eurovelo 8, is the Mediterranean route. And that's one that has been, basically we have got approved this project by the Interreg MED for developing between Cádiz in Spain to Cyprus, this long distance cycle route. That's one of my main activities, and also it's part of the lobby, and it's part of the advocacy that we do, is that we need more funding for cycling. So that's why we apply for a project, that's why we try to change policies, that's why we try that in the next period, financial period, there is more money for cities, regions, public bodies, but also private body, that the Commission allocate more funding for cycling. So I will say those are my main two areas of work within the European Cyclists Federation.
We hope too that there is going to be more money for that kind of thing, but we don't know yet. So thank you. So from what I understood from our previous conversations, your work is actually a bit different. You're more focused on advocacy and on lobbying. So could you please just explain us your activities, what you really do on a daily basis?
Well, let's say we do both. We do lobbying and advocacy, but it's true that as we're representing ourselves public authorities, so local and regional authorities, we're much more in the, let's say, inside policy world, trying to influence the closest we can to the policy makers. So in our everyday work, as I said, it's essentially understanding where the legislative process is, defining the common position that would fit all our members or all the local authorities that we're representing, and then it's also kind of well. What is surprising, or what might sound surprising to some of you, is that lobbying is not only pushing our message to the EU institutions, but it's very much a two-way flow of information, actually, because very often those EU institutions, they know that they're pretty much disconnected, or let's say at least quite far away from the ground. So they're all even coming to us asking, requesting best practices, data from local authorities. I don't know how much money has been spent in local authorities on sustainable transport, or what impact did those local authorities have in terms of I don't know, climate change or energy reduction. So we're really also a source ourselves for those EU institutions, and we can, and I think projects like ours, or like all those projects that we represent, are super important as, let's say, not only test beds to know what is working well, but also to prove to the Commission what is working well and what needs to have more support and to be kind of multiplied throughout the EU in order to, well, achieve the EU energy and climate objectives.
So it's much more like a cooperation work. You work hand to hand, and
it goes in both senses, and let's say the requests we have might not always be the ones that they have thought of, but yeah, it actually goes into the two directions. Yeah.
So what about you, Jesus? What is like a typical activity that you do on a daily basis?
I will say, well, we call ourselves an advocacy organization, but I think it's also because of everyone is afraid of this word lobby. So when you say I'm a lobbyist, it's a bit, but I think somehow the main difference between lobby and advocacy is that actually, as the European Cyclists Federation, we are in contact with what you said. We are like the bridge between the institutions and the reality. So we are in contact with the cities and with the regions through our network of cities and regions that support cycling and want more cycling. We are, of course, the organization of the cyclists themselves. So we are in contact with we know the needs that cyclists have within the EU, and we are able to somehow be this bridge. So among our activities, there are many. I generally, for example, we produce, of course, policy papers, positions regarding many issues that are being debated in the EU, and I had the feeling that the EU is actually very interested to know what actually is needed to be done. So I will say, as I mean, I could tell you later, but we are working on the EU is working on the new passenger right directive. So in the right of the passengers for using, for example, the European trains, and they don't have a clue of what are the passengers' requests. Of course, they know what the operators want. Not so many changes or small changes or continuous business as usual, but cyclists, we want to bring our bicycles within the trains in a safe way without bothering anyone, having specific spaces for us. And it's very funny that you mentioned the rapporteur and so on, and because that's what we do when we are in contact with the Parliament for amendment, so the Commission take into account our comments and the informal way of working also at EU level. For example, the rapporteur of the passenger rights, it goes to my gym. So I know who he is. He probably doesn't know who I am. So I was actually doing some sport, and the people approach you, say, "Are you starting or are you finishing?" No, because he wants to use that machine. And I was like, "Well, that depends on how the passenger rights." I say, "From which organization are you?" No, it was anecdotic and very informal. Of course, my colleagues formally meet him and so on. But yeah, I think somehow the Commission need to know what's going on in so many fields that our type of organization is needed. Sometimes we receive questions such as, "Could you please tell us how much money are we spending on cycling?" And you will say, "Okay, I will think you actually know where you are putting," but we can provide of these numbers. We can actually say how much money we think we need in order to achieve the objective, for example, of doubling cycling in Europe by 2020. So the number of activities, I think it goes beyond something I could enumerate right now, but basically position papers, having many meetings, supporting our members and our partners in order to improve the impact that they have, awareness raising, we have analyzing data and being able to actually offer data for the policy makers that they can use in order to somehow to justify certain investments, etc.
Okay, thank you. I can imagine that when you're doing this work, you're facing some difficulties. It's not easy every time. So, what difficulties do you face, and how do you overcome them? Miriam?
Yeah, there are difficulties. Well, I mean, the most obvious difficulty, well, for the inside lobbying, I think the most obvious difficulty is that there are companies which have much more money and much more resources when we do have to do the lobbying. So it's kind of always this David versus Goliath work that you have to do. So you have to be patient because it's really time consuming, and it can be also costly if you spend a lot of money on it. So I think that's one big difficulty. And for the outside lobbying, so more the advocacy one, the biggest difficulty, or the biggest challenge, I would say rather, is to make sure you're heard, because in our society, which is kind of filled with information, if you want to get your message through, and especially if it's at a specific moment in the legislative process or in the policy process as such, you always have the potential difficulty of having like tens or hundreds of other organizations pushing in with their own messages. So you have to find the right timing actually whenever you want to do the lobbying. Yeah, I think, I know I stay quite general, but I think these are really the biggest for lobbyists, or even for you as project coordinators or partners. I think this might be quite a big challenge. And another challenge is, I think, the fact that the legislative process is a very long one. So in terms of, I'm thinking of all those projects, I think it's a project duration is often not enough to really be able to influence the policy process, because usually you wouldn't start advocacy work at the very beginning of your project, but rather like in the middle when you have outputs from your projects that you can capitalize on. So I think it makes sense, especially if you're doing lobbying within a EU project, to partner with others, maybe with those who are already into the lobbying process, with thematic networks, city networks, any type of NGOs or think tanks, which are already those political forces, and which can, on which you can kind of piggyback with your project requests, policy requests, and that you can use as influences or multipliers for your lobbying work.
Okay, do you have any other type of challenges?
The difficulties, I think first of all, it's an advantage when you are basically representing cyclists and you are selling something so nice like cycling. I mean, no one is against that. Who can be? Yeah? It's like taking care of the nature or this kind of. So we promote something which is actually by 99% of the people pretty nice. So it opened many doors. But as a difficulty, I would say also at the same time, it's very easy that they open the door, but then it's like, oh, cycling, no? And cycling is something like small, like too small to take care of, and for that, we have seen that it's very important to offer data in which we can actually show to the decision makers what is the size of cycling, what does cycling means. You think just about cycling as a sport, and we are talking about something different. We are talking about 65 million 65 million Europeans cycling every day, according to the Eurobarometer. Or we are also talking about that, according to the European Parliament recent study, cyclotourism contribute with 44 billion euros to the European economy every year. So it's 44,000 million euros to the European economy.
That's quite a lot.
That's more than the cruise ship industry.
Wow.
So, however, I'm sure that if we ask to the European authorities, let's get 5 million euros to make bigger the port of Faro, so we can have these super sustainable cruise ships coming and leaving. will say yes. However, you say, let's invest 2 million euros on a long-distance cycle route, let's have people in Faro, in the Algarve, during the low and medium season, spending on average more, standing for longer, hitting rural areas, leaving the money in small and medium businesses where actually the jobs are created. Oh, cycling. So sometimes I think it's a lot of awareness raising that we have to do, and we have found solutions. In the Friends of the MED program, we are going to be monitoring with counters the increase of the use of the long-distance cycle route, Mediterranean route, Europe 8, and also we are going to run, supported by universities of all around Europe and the work of ECF, questionnaire in order to know what is the profile of the cycle tourists. We already know in many parts of Europe, but we also want to prove that those cycle tourists coming here to the south of Europe, to the Mediterranean area, are spending on average more than any cruise ship or anyone going to the beach or anyone. These people hit 4-star hotels with their bikes. They have a special need. They want to eat a lot. They want to eat good. They want to stay in comfortable beds. So that's the image of cycling, I think, also have to be changed. And we are seeing very positive results within this project. And I think that's something we have to communicate. Our project MED Cycle Tourism is a very small project. It's a 3.5 million euros project. However, it is coming first. We had a COSME with 350,000 euros. Now we have a Interreg MED with 3.5 million. But what I would like to say especially to the program and I think to the public in general, the capacity that these projects have to unleash investment. The regional government of Andalusia, in the frame of this project, has announced that it's using further ERDF funds for a value of over 40 million euros to invest on Europe along the Mediterranean coast. We are talking of a multiplier effect. It also have to have an enormous return for the region and for the Mediterranean area. So
that's really good news. I'm glad that the Interreg MED program is doing its bit in helping the tourism, the cycle tourism. So thank you, both of you. Actually, so what we can sum up here is that don't be afraid of networking and having a beer with someone, inviting someone that you know that might be helpful for your project. And what is also positive is that actually those institutions, they come and look for advice. They're not just here. They're not just there to make policy, and so they actually look for advice. So just be there when they look for this advice, and partner up and use influencers. So I don't know if you have any final tips, recommendations for our audience.
Yeah, well, I will say that after all these years dealing with politicians, they love numbers. And for example, this 44,000 million euros economic impact of cycle tourism in Europe every year, it's a study of the European Parliament. So if you unite the European Parliament study with 44 billion euros per year of economic impact, we really have to show how what we are promoting, it's actually having a return and having a benefit towards society. So statistics are super important in order to support your message. Then the way you communicate, we can discuss here how do you lobby, the tools you use, etc. But having the basic, it's very important. And two key words in general in Europe, for example in the frame of the Plan Juncker, but especially in the Mediterranean area. I'm originally from here, basically. Jobs and growth, it's something that have to be in your message, and you have the statistic to support the decision maker take decisions based on these two factors, sustainability as well, but basically nowadays being pragmatic, jobs and growth, it's keywords.
Yeah, I fully agree with Jesus. I think having kind of concrete proof of your political messages is key for the EU institutions as such. I would also advise, that's already what I said before, that you need really to create coalitions if you want to lobby. The more you are, the more weight you would have, the louder you can be in your lobbying and advocacy work. And And as regards our work, as we work with local and regional authorities, it's very useful to have also really spokespersons from your constituency. So having really mayors speak, and not only us as a network, we're just a representative, but if you have really those who are concretely on the ground speaking out loud what the message is and what the needs are, that makes much more, has much more impact usually. And I think my last advice would be that if something doesn't work in advocacy or lobbying, never take it as a failure. It's just really one step forward in your whole lobbying or policy work, and it can just get you closer to the goal, even though you're not there yet. It's really all about being patient, because it's a very, very long process, and you should always think of doing little steps, but which can have a big impact in the end.
Thank you so much. So we're finished now with the interview. So I don't know if any of you had some questions to our project partners. Please raise your hand, and there's a microphone.
So what's your relationship with journalists? Do you have journalists you collaborate with on a regular basis? Do you use them? How do you relate with them?
I can start. We do have a very limited number of journalists that we work with in a, let's say, very privileged way. So we really meet them often. That's the cup of coffee issue that I was mentioning at the very beginning. You really have to keep a personal contact with those journalists. Like 15 years ago, we had a huge media database, and from once in a while, we would send out a press release to all those contacts, and I don't know how many of them even opened our email, certainly not many. Whereas now, having those very, very personal contacts allows us to understand what are their needs, what are their information needs, and they're kind of like the Commission as well. They want to have very concrete local examples. If they talk about energy and climate, they want to make it as concrete and local as possible. So this is like the everyday work we would do, and then whenever there is really a key issue that we want to get out to the general public or to special interests media as well, we would prepare what is called an op-ed, which is like an opinion piece that we prepare, and usually, as I said, it wouldn't come from Energy Cities, but rather from a mayor, for example. It would be signed by one of our mayors or by several mayors, and we would propose this opinion piece exclusively to one of those journalists. And if it fits into their agenda, they take it and they will publish it, and it will be kind of it will have kind of a prominent place in the media that we have chosen. So it's all about being as targeted and as personal as possible, really. And no mass media, and yeah.
So you're actually using the mayor as like ambassador of your message.
Exactly, like
Okay.
as the spokesperson, yeah.
Okay.
I totally agree with her answer. It's more about targeting and having key contacts more than sending information to everyone to see if someone just pick it. Having a special relationship with the different correspondents of the main European media in Brussels. I will say, well, I'm not in the communication. We have a department, a communication team within the European Cyclists Federation, but it's about to having the right contact in the Guardian if you want to guarantee that they publish something that, from our point of view, it's strategic, that it's well known at European level, or in a language, for example, if you want it to be in Politico in English, or this is the Guardian for the English-speaking community, etc. It's about targeting more than something else. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Don't be shy.
If there isn't any more questions, I would just like to know if you have some sort of plan, or do you do it organically day by day, or do you plan, for example, in advance for 1 year and structure an articulated plan in order for your lobbying activities, for example?
Well, we have a master plan. It's linked to something I said before. When they say, well, cycling is something too little, we managed to put together with all the possible stakeholders, cycling industry, cities, regions, cyclists, etc., European cycling strategy for cycling. So that's somehow our policy document, our Bible, and of course the communication plan and the lobby activity plan of the European Cyclists Federation is in line with this EU cycling strategy, and the communication team of ECF is in charge to implement the communication, working together with the lobby, with the policy team. So definitely we need to have a concrete plan for the year. So it's always approved at least 1 year beforehand.
Yeah, same for us actually. We have a plan which goes in line with EU policy or even national policy milestones, let's say. So these can be both legislative issues, these can be political elections as well. Any move in the political sphere is always an opportunity to lobby, so we would know these in advance. Most of the time, well, those bigger events, you know them in advance. Some others might come up, and you should always be spontaneous enough to seize the opportunity to hop on for any opinion influencing. But we do have this plan, and we would anticipate those milestones in order to know when we can do an action that can have an influence or an impact.
Okay.
I just wanted to find out something about the financing. I understand that the NFTC there's some kind of fee from the cities that they participate in this initiative. How about the cycling organization? What do we get in financing?
Well, we have different sources, and actually we have a pretty interesting document in another report and a graphic in which you can see the evolution within the last few years, because in Brussels it's very surprising for many people that there is such a big organization advocating for cycling. We are over 25, which is pretty big for Brussels' size of organizations. And of course it's linked to our funding, because I think 15 years ago we were 1 employee, so the evolution is pretty impressive. The funding originally come from our members, cycling organizations, so that's the basics that would allow us in the beginning to co-finance EU projects, to have access to funding from the public sector. So that was the very beginning. Once we start to have an impact, definitely that's raised the attention of also the cities and regions along Europe, because they think we are reliable partners. So we created a network of cities and regions for cyclists as well, so our membership increased. Also you see that now there are bike sharing schemes everywhere. Every city has a bike sharing scheme, so we also created a bike sharing scheme platform. So those are the sources from membership, let's say, and that allow us to co-finance, for example, projects such as the MED Cycle Tour, etc. But furthermore, at some point our impact was so important regarding how to improve policies for cycling in Europe that definitely the industry also realized that we are having a very positive impact. If more people cycle more often, definitely people need more bicycles, people need more expensive bicycles. The e-bike, there is a boom also on e-bikes in Europe as well. So we also have a cycling industry club, and we don't work for them, they are donors, but we also receive donations from the industry, and that's what complete, let's say, the financing source that we have. But the basics, the membership, and of course we don't rely only on public funding in order to be, let's say, 1 year we could not have any luck and don't get any project, but in general we run COSME, Interreg, Horizon 2020 projects, etc.
Thank you. I think there is one more question.
Yes. in your opinion, it's
No.
You have to approach the micro.
now?
Yeah.
No, because I was thinking about activism. I mean, because the thing that you're explaining, it's like this lobby in a smooth way. But then we have the activism, I mean, all environmental aspects. We know that, for example, Greenpeace, their activism, and they finally do something. So, in your opinion, in our case of the topic that we are looking for, which because sometimes we can have these coordinations with this kind of activism. So where we can allocate activism.
It's a very good point, and actually we do it. Well, first of all, at Energy Cities, at least, we're more into the soft lobbying because we're representing local authorities. So we're still, representatives of a political instance, and we can't be as radical, I would say, as some grassroots organizations would be. But indeed, we join coalitions which include, for example, Greenpeace, as you say, Cynthia. For example, one of our big asks is about local energy. So the energy transition is all about having more renewables, and which means that we need more decentralized energy, that we need to have much more people producing energy, and mostly at the local level. So we're really pushing for having not only citizens, but also citizen cooperatives and even local authorities being energy producers. So currently there is this new Renewables Directive, which is being drafted and which has been adopted in the trilogue very recently. So we had joined a coalition with, for example, RESCOOP, which is the European Federation of Citizen Cooperatives, Friends of the Earth Europe, which is really one of those more militant, activist, grassroots movements, and maybe you, Jesus, might work with some of them as well. Greenpeace as well, CAN Europe, which is the Climate Action Network. So for some very specific activities which are also related to more to the groundwork and involving more than just local authorities but also citizens, we would do it. And I think you as projects, you can very well do it as well. I think it makes sense, and it's always a more creative and let's say if you want to put pressure or influence the general public, that's really the best way to do it, using those let's say more grassroots groups, which also use different tools. I mean, they're much stronger very often in really campaigning, in the sense of having creative campaigns, having visual campaigns, having kind of provocative slogans, using social media much more. I mean, we use a lot Twitter. For us, Twitter is really for policy influencing. Twitter is just a great tool. You can see what is going on and you can react immediately. You have a great engagement rate. For grassroots movements, it would be more also Facebook, which gets closely to the citizens, or any of the other social media. So you definitely should use this as one of the lobbying advocacy options, I would say.
Your members are citizens, I understand, cities. In our case, actually, our members are activists. So also that's something that we have to deal with, the image of the cyclist as an activist who basically in the 70s was burning a car, and now these people who are not actually burning cars but cooperating with governments. So of course what we do in Brussels is very soft lobby and advocacy, and but also on the other side we have our members. So I'm originally from Spain, and our members from Spain are the traditional cycling activists and enthusiasts, and someone who believes it's like a religion, no? Cycling. Of course, there something to manage. It's very different. But at EU level, we also recommend to our members to have a very pragmatic approach. And of course, it's very interesting sometimes because they are able sometimes to turn things and have really an impact, and we use them a lot for our campaigns, for contacting MEPs, and MEPs react to the citizens. They are not used to the citizens' contact. I think MEPs are very surprised if members of the European Parliament are very surprised if a cycling organization from their constituency contact them and tell them, you are voting for passenger right, take into account that in Asturias this is a big thing and we want to have our bicycles on the trains. And if not, we are going to send a press release, and well, that's how they threat. We will never do that. But yeah, exactly, you can somehow also use them to help on the campaigning, etc. And then on partnership, I think it's, I was before a bit comparing cycle tourism with the cruise ship industry, but we cooperate with them. For example, we are promoters together with the European Travel Commission of the European Manifesto for Tourism. So something that everyone sees as so small, like cycle tourism, but together with the European Travel Commission, in our offices, we had the first meeting of the European Manifesto, that it has an impact. It happened 2 years ago, but if you see the last COSME call, it has double funding than in the previous one. That's thanks to all the sector united in Brussels, telling to the Commission, to the Commissioner, that then has been 4 commissioners involved, there is not enough money for tourism at EU level, and you don't take tourism seriously. And in that case, we have an alliance with the cruise ship, with the most polluting things you could imagine, but also with, of course, the other organizations that work on the tourism sector, because we have a common interest that tourism is taken seriously. So I think definitely on both levels you can have wonderful partnership and cooperations.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. So now it's time to wrap up, and so we have a small coffee break for 30 minutes. And I don't know what time it is. So until noon, be back at noon, please.
Thank you. It's 8 minutes coffee break. Sorry. It was great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.